Welcome back. This is the fourth lecture for the Advanced Pollinator Training Module for the Hawaii Master Gardeners on native Hawaiian yellow-faced bees. If you're just joining us and intend to complete the advanced certification, please be sure to take the pre-test before continuing, which is located on the course homepage. If you haven't done so already, be sure to complete quizzes 1 through 3. By the end of this module, you will have an understanding of basic Hawaiian biogeography in relation to the native insect fauna, understand the origin and diversification of Hawaiian yellow-faced bees, appreciate their importance in native ecosystems as well as their perilous current status, and gain some insight into current efforts to recover endangered yellow-faced bee species. Let's start with a quick introduction to Hawaiian biogeography. A defining feature of the natural history of Hawaii is something that scientists call taxonomic disharmony. This is just a fancy term for something you're probably already quite familiar with as residents of the islands, which is the absence or underrepresentation of many groups of plants and animals that are common elsewhere, like reptiles and terrestrial mammals, and the overrepresentation of other groups, such as the large group of birds known as Hawaiian honeycreepers. This characteristic of the Hawaiian flora and fauna is a simple result of the extreme isolation of the archipelago. Located over 2,000 miles from the nearest continental landmass, the barriers to colonization by organisms of almost all types were formidable prior to modern times. Few species successfully crossed the ocean and established in the islands, and many types of organisms were filtered out, namely those that couldn't fly, hitch a ride on a bird, drift long distances on the air currents, or float for long periods of time on the sea. But for those that were successful, many ecological opportunities awaited them, and in many cases, these colonizing species subsequently diversified through evolution into many related forms, most of which occurred nowhere else on Earth. When such speciation also results in the evolutionary adaptation of different forms to different habitat types or survival strategies, it is called adaptive radiation, and Hawaii is one of the world's premier locations for this phenomenon. Famous examples include the honeycreepers that I already mentioned, with their amazing diversity of bill types and feeding strategies, as well as a group of over 30 species of plants known as the Silversword Alliance. Today, these plants inhabit a wide range of ecosystems and exhibit extraordinarily diverse growth forms, but all evolved from a single ancestral species related to modern tarweeds in California. Taxonomic disharmony and adaptive radiation are just as prevalent among Hawaii's invertebrate fauna. For example, it is estimated that as many as 10,000 insect species are, or were, native to Hawaii. I say were because many of these species are now thought to be extinct, having disappeared over the past few centuries. But it is also estimated that this diversity arose from just 350 to 400 original colonists. As with the plants and birds, a few insect colonizers diversified into many species, and many groups of insects common in continental regions are absent or represented by just a few species in Hawaii. There are many examples of this, including Hawaii's bee fauna. Of the 7 currently recognized bee families in the world, only one, the Colletidae or yellow-faced bees, managed to colonize the islands on its own and evolve native species. Furthermore, all of Hawaii's native bees belong to the same genus, Hylaeus, and research has determined that all of the native Hylaeus species are related to each other and that they all evolved from a single common ancestor. This means that only one type of bee is known to have successfully made it to Hawaii, and this founder subsequently diversified into the 60-plus yellow-faced bee species we have today. All of these species are endemic to Hawaii, meaning that they occur nowhere else in the world. It is also therefore true that no other types of bees are native to Hawaii, including not only the European honeybees, but also the other solitary species that can now be found here, such as the Lasioglossum sweat bees and the Megachile leafcutter bees. So how did a single colonizer diversify into over 60 species? In part by adapting to all of the many different ecosystem and habitat types that exist in Hawaii, from coastal strand to subalpine shrubland. Yellow-faced bees were incredibly successful in taking advantage of the resources provided by many different types of native flowers and proliferated dramatically. As recently as the early 1900s, the British naturalist R.C.L. Perkins observed that they were, quote, almost the most ubiquitous of any Hawaiian insects. Yellow-faced bees are thought to visit the flowers of over 50 species of native plants and can be among the most common floral visitors of the dominant plant species in many ecosystem types. For example, yellow-faced bees were found to represent over 85% of the visitors to Hylaeus silversword flowers in one study. It therefore stands to reason that in natural areas where they are still common, yellow-faced bees provide important ecosystem services in the form of plant pollination. This excludes an interesting subset of yellow-faced bee species, which are kleptoparasitic. These 5 species do not collect pollen to provision nests for their young, but instead search for nests that are already provisioned by other yellow-faced bee species. They then lay their eggs inside them, in effect stealing the pollen and nectar stores of other bees. As Hawaiian yellow-faced bees diversified, they also developed different appearances, which is most noticeable among the males. In most species, only the males carry the yellow facial markings, and the size and shape of these markings vary from species to species. In a few species, the males are all black, like the females. Pictured here is a sampling of this diversity, as drawn in the seminal monograph on Hawaiian yellow-faced bees by Drs. Colletidae and Carl Manyaka. These drawings have been digitized and posted online by Forrest and Kim Starr at the website indicated, and make a great resource if you happen to get a glimpse of one of our native bees and want to try to identify it. As an interesting aside, phylogenetic analysis, or the study of evolutionary relationships among groups of organisms, conducted on Hawaiian Hylaeus, suggests that they are likely to have first colonized the Big Island. If true, this means that for most of the geologic history of the current main Hawaiian Islands, there may have been no native bees present. Other native insect groups, like moths and flies, would therefore have likely been very important pollinators in native ecosystems before yellow-faced bees arrived. That insects of some sort have always been important pollinators of native plants is not in doubt. Based on floral morphology, it has been estimated that 2/3 of native plant species are pollinated primarily by insects. This compares to only 19% by birds and 14% by wind. Unfortunately, the status of Hawaiian yellow-faced bees today is dire. Much of the native habitat that they formerly relied on is now gone, either converted to agriculture or development, or overrun by non-native plants whose floral resources are largely unattractive to yellow-faced bees. Even where native plant communities persist, other threats abound. Studies have found that invasive insect predators are particularly damaging. A consequential example of the taxonomic disharmony that was discussed earlier is the near or complete absence of social insects, including ants and yellow jacket wasps, from the native Hawaiian fauna. A lack of prior experience with these groups may explain why yellow-faced bees have been found to be especially impacted by these novel predators. But other non-native predatory arthropods like spiders and assassin bugs also likely contribute. In addition, yellow-faced bees today have many non-native species competing with them for nectar and pollen, including solitary bees and honeybees and many species of flies, wasps, and other insects. The combined effects of this are mostly unknown, but could be considerable. Finally, the role of novel diseases in contributing to yellow-faced bee declines is unclear, but recent evidence suggests it could be important. All of these factors have led to a situation where, in a recent assessment, nearly half of the species were classified as belonging to the most vulnerable 3 conservation status categories defined. The 3 vulnerable categories recognize species as either being restricted to endangered habitat types, as being very rare and probably endangered, or having no recent collections and should be considered endangered. Based in part on this assessment, 7 species were formally listed as endangered by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in 2016, the first bees to be so designated in the country. Abundant populations of yellow-faced bees can now only be found in relatively few areas in Hawaii, most prominently at higher elevations on Maui, Kauai, and the Big Island, as well as a few more restricted coastal sites. Pictured here is an approximate depiction of remaining areas of native habitat suitable for yellow-faced bees in Hawaii. Given all of the threats facing Hawaiian yellow-faced bees, what can be done to conserve them? A program to investigate this question was initiated several years ago as a collaboration between the Hawaii Department of Land and Natural Resources, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the University of Hawaii. One initial aspect that seemed like a promising avenue of research concerned nesting ecology. If yellow-faced bee nests are raided by invasive ants, and if nesting sites are preempted by competing non-native bees and wasps, could nesting habitat augmentation using artificial nesting sites benefit their populations? As you learned in previous modules, solitary bees like Hylaeus do not build hives for colonies. Instead, females make individual cylindrical nests, which consist of multiple cells in a line, one cell for each offspring. Some kinds of solitary bees wall off each cell and the nest entrance with mud, while others use leaf pieces that they cut for this purpose, and still others use resin. Bees in the family Colletidae, the yellow-faced bees, instead use a clear cellophane-like material that is produced by internal glands to line and separate each cell and to seal off the nest entrance. This is why this family of bees is also sometimes called cellophane bees. The nesting habits of most species of Hawaiian yellow-faced bees have not been investigated, but it is known that certain species nest in holes or tunnels in the soil or under rocks, while other species nest within hollow twigs or in tunnels within larger branches. Generally, it is thought that species inhabiting drier habitats tend to nest more commonly in the ground, while those inhabiting mesic-to-wet forests tend to nest arboreally. It is also thought that bees generally use pre-existing cavities or tunnels, often created by other insects like wood-boring beetles, rather than excavating their own nesting spaces. Bees have also been found to use naturally occurring tunnels, such as holes in coral rubble. It's been known for some time that among Hawaiian yellow-faced bees, species that nest in twigs or wood can be attracted to use trap nests, or pieces of wood with appropriate-sized holes drilled in them. The Yellow-Faced Bee Project therefore hypothesized that the addition of such nesting blocks might benefit species at risk, especially if they could be made to exclude invasive predators and competitors. Initial research determined that if a sticky substance, known as tree tanglefoot, is applied to the base of the nesting block, it excludes ants and increases nesting success of yellow-faced bees. The block shown here also has a PVC collar over the tanglefoot, which helps prevent wind-blown material from sticking to it and creating a bridge for ants to cross. The blocks therefore provide an ant-free nesting habitat, which may be critical to their success. These research blocks were also fitted with plastic inserts within the nesting holes. This allowed researchers to periodically pull out the inserts and observe nest development and quantify nesting success and reproductive output. In this insert, you can see an adult female and 4 nest cells provisioned with yellow pollen and nectar. Additional research determined that the size of the nesting hole is important. By keeping the nesting tubes between about 3 and 3.5 millimeters in diameter, the blocks remained attractive to native yellow-faced bees, but excluded nesting by non-native leafcutter bees and keyhole wasps. These combined results determine that endangered yellow-faced bee species will in fact use artificial nesting blocks, and that such blocks can provide a safe refuge from predators and competitors if they are designed correctly. The project is now focusing on field studies that are aimed at determining whether this type of nesting habitat augmentation will actually boost population numbers, and if so, whether this recovery is also dependent on other factors, like the quality of foraging resources in the area. So, can you provide similar nesting habitat for Hawaiian yellow-faced bees in your garden? Unfortunately, our current understanding suggests that this is unlikely to be successful. Native yellow-faced bees almost never seem to occur outside of habitat with abundant native vegetation, so unless you live near a fairly intact forest reserve or other natural area, they probably won't find your garden. but I'll emphasize that this is our best guess, and I'd love for someone to prove me wrong. Either way, you may succeed in attracting non-native solitary bees in the area, which may result in improved pollination services. Perhaps a better way to help native yellow-faced bees at this time is to help educate others about them. Now that you've learned a little bit about their biology and ecology, you can inform others as to their importance in native ecosystems and the importance of conserving those remaining native ecosystems that serve as their last refuge. This concludes the fourth Advanced Pollinator Training module. For those of you pursuing the advanced certification for Hawaii Master Gardeners, don't forget to take Quiz 4, found under Lesson Materials. You need a score of 70% or greater for credit. Stay tuned for the next lecture, which will be on the basics of beekeeping.